The night was supposed to be quiet, but in the fog-covered hills of Oregon, silence can turn dangerous in a heartbeat. A cold wind howled across the old Willow Creek Bridge as headlights cut through the mist. That's when Thomas Hale, CEO, father, and man who thought he'd seen it all, hit the brakes. Through the smoke and rain, he saw it. A car hanging halfway off the bridge, its wheels spinning uselessly above the rushing river. Inside, a young woman in a torn wedding dress, her hands bound to the steering wheel. The smell of gasoline, the faint cry for help, and then the spark. Flames licking up the hood, the world narrowing to a single impossible choice. Run or risk his life for a stranger. What Thomas didn't know was that this night would change both their lives forever. Because sometimes, destiny hides inside the fire we're most afraid to face. Before the story begins, take a breath, because this isn't just about rescue. It's about redemption, courage, and love found where no one was looking. If you believe in second chances, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell, because here at Golden Tales, every story lights a spark of hope. The early winter wind blew through the canyon like a sharp whisper when Thomas Hale noticed the flickering flash of hazard lights lost in the fog. It was nearly 6 in the evening in Silver Ridge, Oregon, and daylight was sinking behind the line of pines like a silent ship. At 47, Thomas had learned to recognize the difference between an ordinary roadside noise and the kind that changes the course of a life. He slowed his truck, pulled over before the old Willow Creek Bridge, and cut the engine. The world fell silent. Just wind, water, and that blinking light. Thomas was the CEO of Hale Timber and Construction, a company he'd inherited from his father and turned, over the years, into a thriving and respected business in the region. His hands, despite the suits, still carried the calluses of his youth spent on job sites. In the glove box beside him were always a multi-tool knife and a first aid kit. Habit, precaution, or, as he preferred to think, respect for the unexpected. He stepped out, inhaled the sharp air, and walked toward the railing. The river, 20 meters below, rushed faster after the recent rains. On the far side of the bridge, something scraped, metal against wood, a rough, desperate sound. Thomas ran. At the end of the bridge, half off the road, a dark sedan hung sideways, its nose dipping over the edge, held only by 2 aging beams and sheer luck. The driver's door twitched open, and a white veil fluttered out. A bridal veil, dancing in the cold wind like a flag of surrender. "Hey!" Thomas shouted, approaching carefully. "Is anyone there?" A sob answered. A pale face appeared through the cracked glass. Grace Bennett, 26, dark eyes, her hair in a messy bun, a tilted tiara barely clinging on. The dress, once exquisite, was torn and streaked with mud. Thomas saw her trembling shoulders, then noticed what froze his stomach. Grace's hands were zip-tied to the steering wheel. "Please," she said, voice breaking. He said, "If I didn't come, he'd teach me a lesson." I tried to run. He caught me. The car groaned, sliding another inch. Thomas dropped his backpack and moved with precision. He scanned the beams, the angle, the weight, the sound of the river. He yanked open the rear door, the only one not jammed, and crawled inside. The air was thick with gasoline and fear. "My name's Thomas," he said steadily. "I'm going to get you out of here, okay? You just need to breathe with me. Count to 4, inhale, hold, and exhale. Ready?" Grace obeyed, eyes locked on his as if that rhythm were the only rope keeping her from falling. The zip ties were industrial grade, biting deep into her skin. He slid the blade between nylon and flesh. A snap. The first one broke. "His name is Victor," Grace whispered, staring at the cracked windshield. I thought he loved me. When I said I wasn't sure, that I needed time, he said I was ungrateful. I tried to leave. He took my keys. He drove, tied my hands, said no one would hear me on the way to the church. "I hear you," said Thomas. I'm right here. Another snap, the second tie gave way. The car creaked, beams straining like old bones. Now, easy, he instructed. When I say go, we'll slide over the seat and out the back door. Don't look down. Look at me. Grace nodded. On go. They moved as one, fear guided by calm. Thomas pulled her by the waist, the dress tearing, one heel catching then breaking free. They crawled out and dragged themselves across the worn planks of the bridge. Behind them, the sedan groaned, tilted, and fell. The sound thundered through the canyon. The veil, torn away by the wind, fluttered once before vanishing into the river. Grace collapsed to her knees, gasping in sobs. Thomas pulled off his jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders. You're safe, he said softly. Each word weighted perfectly to anchor her back into herself. We'll call the police. Do you have anyone you can trust? Grace's silence said enough. Thomas made the calls: police, fire department, ambulance. Then another to Lily, his 21-year-old daughter, a psychology student who worked part-time at a women's shelter. Dad? You okay? Her voice quivered. I need you home later, he said. A young woman's been through something terrible. I brought her here. I'll explain when you arrive. Rescue crews came, took statements, photos, measurements. A patrol car went straight to Victor Lang's address. The name Grace spoke like a bitter taste. She told them what she could. No family close by. She'd grown up in foster homes, bouncing between houses until she could support herself with double shifts as a barista and a nanny. He came in as a customer, she said, her voice trembling. He was kind, then generous. I mistook generosity for care. Took me a while to realize it was control. The social worker, a firm-eyed woman with gentle hands, took notes, offered shelter, legal counsel, follow-ups. Grace, dizzy and exhausted, looked to Thomas. He didn't answer for her, only nodded when she chose not to stay in an emergency dorm that night. I have a guest room, Thomas said, turning to the social worker. Not as an escape from protocol, but as someone assuming responsibility. My daughter will be there. Will follow every instruction. It's temporary, just until she can rest. The woman assessed them both, asked a dozen questions, then agreed. Grace's case would proceed through official channels, a restraining order already in motion. During the drive home, Grace stared out the window, her eyes tracing the outlines of trees and distant farmhouse lights. Thomas knew that silence. It wasn't emptiness but a room where the soul gathers its pieces in the dark. You can roll down the window a little, he said after a while. The river air helps clear your head. At least for me. Grace lowered the glass a few inches. The scent of cold water and cedar entered, clean and sharp. Gradually, the knot in her throat loosened enough for words. Thank you, she whispered, for seeing me. Sometimes that's all it takes. Someone who actually sees. Thomas only nodded. He'd learned through life and through Lily that some things are meant to be held, not fixed. Thomas's house sat on a soft hill with a long porch and a twisted fig tree in the yard. Inside, framed photos of Lily at every age. A Halloween costume, softball uniform, graduation cap, that crooked smile she got from him. Thomas made soup, set out a pile of clothes Lily had left behind. Grace barely ate. She showered long. When she came back with damp hair and wearing oversized sweatpants, she found Thomas washing the same mug for the third time. Sometimes repetition is a quiet prayer. I can help, she said, her voice steadier. You can sit, he replied with a small smile, and tell me what you need or what you don't. Tonight I'm just a pair of hands and an ear. She sat, looked at the table, the window, the nothing. I need silence, she said finally, and to not feel like a problem. I've been a problem too many times. Here you're a guest, said Thomas. Tomorrow we can visit the shelter where Lily works. They have a great program for rebuilding life. Grace nodded, tears falling softly now, like a drizzle that finally agrees to fall. Lily arrived around 9, bringing the scent of new notebooks and deliberate warmth. She sat beside Grace, introduced herself, and didn't pry. Within minutes, they were laughing over a silly college story about a professor who mixed up names and called Lily Lima for a month. "I'm terrible with names too," Grace confessed, and the house exhaled with them. Days found their rhythm. Grace slept, ate, sat under the fig tree learning how to listen to her own body again. Lily arranged through the shelter a voucher for a temporary furnished unit, and Stephen, HR manager at Hale Timber, offered Grace a job as administrative assistant in the safety department. Thomas insisted the offer come from the team, not him. Conditions: flexible hours, counseling guaranteed, and no pressure to stay if she wasn't ready. Grace accepted. On her first day, her hands shook as she clipped her badge, but the team welcomed her naturally. "Everyone starts at the basics," Stephen said. "The rest we learn together." After 2 weeks, Grace's posture changed. Her body remembered how to stand tall. Her eyes began to lift from the floor. She arrived early, organized the day's tasks, found comfort in systems, small structures that kept chaos from spilling over. One Friday afternoon, she proposed a checklist change that cut inspection time by 20% without losing accuracy. Stephen smiled, and Thomas, who rarely gave praise, said, "Good work. I like when things have a place," she admitted shyly. "It's how I stop everything from falling apart." "So do I," said Thomas, thinking of the years when the place of his wife had been an empty frame on the wall. Amanda, Lily's mother, had died when their daughter was 6. He'd learned to cook pasta, braid imperfect hair, and understand that some absences aren't filled, they're carried. Court hearings began. Victor denied everything, claimed Grace had consented, that she was hysterical, that he'd only tried to help. The prosecutor worked hard, but what held Grace together were the small things. Lily waiting with coffee after testimonies, Thomas waiting outside the courthouse without questions, the shelter staff who quietly celebrated when her protective order became permanent. "You have choice," her lawyer said, eyes tired but kind. "And you have time. Both exist together. Don't let anyone rush you." Grace healed in layers. She listened to music again, found a YouTube channel that read poetry at dusk, danced alone in the tiny apartment she now called hers. One day, she brought a pot of lavender to her desk. The scent was faint, but it was hers. Thomas watched from a respectful distance. Meetings, short trips, CEO duties. He handled them with his usual steady grace. Sometimes, at the end of the day, he'd see her laughing with coworkers. Sometimes they'd cross paths on the stairs. A quiet good night that somehow kept the world aligned. In March, a storm knocked out the power for hours. Candles lit the old photographs. The fig tree cast shadows on the wall. Grace and Lily made s'mores on the gas stove, telling childhood stories that never happened but healed something anyway. Kites flying too high, talking dogs, a grandmother who wrapped wind in parchment paper. "Have you always been like this?" Grace asked Thomas suddenly, in that tone intimacy uses when it finally arrives. Unannounced but without fear. "Like what?" "Calm. A place where things stop hurting for a while." Thomas thought. His face, when serious, looked like a house with few windows and less hurry. "No," he said. "I learned. From my daughter. From time. From what broke. And from what stayed standing after." Grace nodded. The lights flickered back. The microwave clock blinked midnight, a reminder that sometimes you have to reset the hours for the day to continue. Spring's final hearing came. The judge heard it all. Photos of the recovered car, the mechanic's report showing tampered brakes, the zip ties with DNA evidence. Grace's testimony, firm where once it shook. The verdict, a guilty sentence, fell softly but changed everything. Grace didn't smile. She just breathed, fully, as if air was finally allowed. That evening, Thomas opened his door to find an envelope on the porch. Inside was a short note. "Thank you for reminding me that I could choose. G." And folded beside it, a veil. Not the one the river had swallowed, of course. Another, bought secondhand downtown, a tiny stain near the hem. Thomas pressed the fabric to his face, as if it carried the quiet blessing of all things reclaimed. The next day, Grace walked into the office with her hair trimmed to her shoulders and a light that wasn't makeup or angle or trick. It was the light of someone who'd moved back into her own body. She asked to speak with Thomas. "I decided to enroll in community college," she said, hands clasped. "Social work. I want to help women who've been through this. I think I'm good at building systems and holding space. The hard part is, I'll need fewer hours. Maybe take a break. I don't want to let anyone down." Thomas listened and, with the same calm that once freed her hands, began untying the invisible knots of guilt. "You don't need to apologize for growing," he said. "We'll adjust. And when you need to leave, the door will still be here. Good doors don't lock from the inside. They close just enough to keep the right wind." Grace smiled, half shy, half brave, thanked him, shook his hand, went back to her desk, her lavender, her tidy stacks of paper that suddenly felt lighter. Summer came with a local festival in Silver Ridge's main square, food stalls, teenage bands, kids with tiger-painted faces. Lily dragged her father to a ring-toss booth where he lost miserably and won a tiny stuffed bear. Grace arrived later, after volunteering at the shelter, wearing a soft blue dress and sandals that made no apologies for comfort. She carried a box of donated books. "I brought you something," she said, showing the top book. Uncle Tom's Cabin, an old hardcover with yellowed pages. "I first read it in foster care. The woman who ran the house said books are homes you fit into when the world feels too small. Thought you might like that." Thomas took the book, feeling something shift quietly inside. They walked through the square, and, as always, it was Lily who voiced what no one dared. "You two ever notice you look at the world the same way?" she teased, tossing popcorn into the air and missing. "Like it deserves a second chance. And a third. And a fourth." Grace laughed. Thomas raised his hands in mock surrender. The three of them sat on the courthouse steps, watching the sky change colors until the lights strung above the square looked like tamed constellations. Autumn returned, rust gold and tender, almost a year since the bridge. Life had found a gentler rhythm. Grace split her time between school, internship at the shelter, and part-time work at Hale Timber, where her checklist, now part of the official manual, bore her name in small print at the bottom. Lily, in her final year of college, alternated between diagnosing the shelter cat with imaginary illnesses and studying for finals. Thomas kept the company steady and the house warm. One Saturday, they drove to the rebuilt Willow Creek Bridge. Lily wanted photos for a project about places that almost swallow people but don't. The bridge had been restored, new beams, a plaque noting the community fund that had supported it. A fund Grace had helped design. "I needed to come back," Grace said, resting her hands on the railing. "Not to relive it, to close it, and open something new." The river ran gentler now. The air smelled of cedar and wet earth. Thomas stood a few steps behind, respecting the moment that wasn't his. Sometimes courage means being near without taking space. "Did you know," Grace said, still looking at the water, "that I almost burned a notebook that night? It had old, silly dreams, writing, traveling, learning to float on my back, making pancakes that don't stick, planting lavender, having an address to return borrowed books. Small things. And now," Thomas asked softly, "now I want to buy another notebook. Fill it with small things. Maybe some big ones too." Lily came over, hands full of cutouts and ideas. "Make a list," she said. "I'll be your list partner. We'll check them off one by one." Grace smiled. The sun settled over their shoulders like a folded blanket. Later, back at the house, Grace pulled a small package from her bag. She set it on the kitchen table where so many conversations had lived. "I was going to wait," she said nervously, "but I don't know when later is." Thomas untied the ribbon. Inside was a photo frame with a picture Lily had taken at the summer festival. The three of them in profile, laughing at a joke no one would remember. Etched on the frame were the words, "Homes are people." He looked at Grace. She held his gaze. "I'm not rushing anything," she said, "and I'm not giving you any responsibility you didn't already choose. I just wanted to say that I found my way home. And when I look at you and Lily, it feels like my body remembers what that means." Thomas breathed, like a man finding an answer in a drawer he thought was lost. "I don't know what chapter we're on," he said with a half smile, "but I know I don't want to close the book." They stayed there, in a kitchen that knew how to hold secrets, unhurried, while the clock moved without demanding. Lily walked in carrying 3 mugs of hot chocolate and, as always, closed the circle. "You two are insufferably romantic in denial," she said. Grace laughed. So did Thomas. The shelter cat Lily often smuggled and jumped onto the table, knocking over a napkin, as if stamping the moment with a seal of normalcy. Some stories end with airport kisses or fireworks over famous bridges. This one didn't need to. It chose the sound of a kettle, the scent of lavender, the rustle of the fig tree. It chose half-open doors, fresh notebooks, checklists that prevent accidents, and courtrooms quietly conquered by what's right. It chose the courage of a woman who rebuilt herself step by step, and the serenity of a man who learned, through loss and fatherhood, that the highest form of love is unselfish presence. In the end, Silver Ridge remained the same small town, with its restored bridge, its summer fair, its square that mirrored the sky. The following autumn, when the canyon wind blew again, Thomas, Grace, and Lily crossed that bridge carrying grocery bags and casual conversation. The river flowed, alive and patient, and above it walked an unlikely family, not moving away from the past, but into a future that could hold notebooks, lavender, and doors without locks. And if you, reading this, ever recognize the sound of beams creaking under your feet, remember, there is always a voice that can call you back, and a pair of hands trained not to let go. Sometimes that voice is your own. Sometimes it's the one who stops before the bridge, opens the back door, and says quietly but firmly, "I hear you. I'm here." Which part of this story touched you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to read them. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of our next emotional stories.